Hola a todos y bienvenidos al MOOC, Curso Básico de Lengua y Cultura Españolas, Nivel 2. Welcome to the Basic Spanish Language and Culture course, Level 2. Soy Vijaya Venkataraman y soy tu profesor de español para este curso online. En este video vamos a hablar de las escritoras más reconocidas de España. Vamos a enfocarnos en el siglo XIX y XX y también mencionaremos a algunas escritoras y las tendencias principales del siglo XXI. In this video, you will learn about Santa Teresa de Jesús and María de Sayas, important aspects of the lives and works of women writers of 19th and 20th century Spain, and some young voices from the 21st century. Back in the 16th century and through well into the 20th, perhaps the convent was rather a liberating institution that allowed women to flourish in certain areas that would have been barred for them outside the religious context. While this liberty came at a dear and strict price to their individuality, it is by no means a coincidence that the first literary creations by female authors in Spanish came in the form of mystic writings that revolved around a religious trope. Santa Teresa of Avila, also known as Saint Teresa of Jesus, she was canonized in 1622. A Spanish nun, she was one of the great mystics and religious women of the Roman Catholic Church and author of spiritual classics. Active during the Counter-Reformation, she reformed the Carmelite orders of both men and women. Her ascetic doctrine has been accepted as a classical exposition of the contemplative life, and her spiritual writings are among the most widely read. Her written contributions include her autobiography, The Life of Teresa of Jesus, and her seminal work, The Interior Castle, which are both an integral part of Spanish Renaissance literature. Together with The Way of Perfection, her work forms part of the literary canon of Christian mysticism and Christian meditation practices. María de Sayas y Sotomayor, born in 1590 and famous in her own lifetime for her short prose works, she occupies a firm place among the productive writers of the 17th century Spain. Her novels about love and intrigue, which used melodramatic and frequently horrific elements, were widely read and very popular. Novels of Romance and Exemplary Tales is a collection of short novels about the romantic complications of married life, ostensibly told one evening to amuse a sick woman. The stories are mostly about women who are mistreated by husbands or seducers. In many of her stories, Saya accused Spanish society of leaving women without the information or emotional strength to resist seduction and abuse. Now we go to the 19th century. Public recognition of the woman in Spain can be traced back to the late 1840s to the final stages of a half-hearted Spanish Romantic movement. The Romantics' emphasis on subjectivity and feelings sanctioned women's writings. At the same time, the steady growth in print culture and the press provided women the space for publication. Women writers fell into two categories. They either questioned and defied dominant gender ideology, the strategy of a few, or conformed to prevailing ideas to secure opportunities and a respectable career, the strategy of the great majority. Those who defied dominant gender ideology were Gertrudis Gomez de Avellaneda, who was actually born and raised in Cuba, and she traveled to Spain only when she was 23. Cuba was a Spanish possession at the time, but it had strong national and literary identity of its own and was about to embark on the wars of independence. Having established her reputation in Spain, when Avellaneda returned to Cuba more than 20 years later, she was reproached for having left the island. In Spain, however, she stretched the limits of social decorum expected of Spanish women by associating herself with the less restrictive mores of Cuban high society. This problematic national identity duel which marked Avellaneda as exotic and different in Spain and as pro-Spanish in Cuba, allowed herself actually to distance from both cultures and to criticize their deeply held beliefs and social customs. In Cuba, her target of attack was slavery, and in Spain, it was primarily the oppression of women. Her first novel, Saab, published in 1838, voices the need for social reform and calls for equal opportunity to all, especially blacks and women. Another writer, Concepcion Arenal, born in 1820 in Galicia, was a graduate in law. She was a thinker, journalist, poet, and Spanish dramatic author, and considered pioneer in Spanish feminism. During the 1840s, she defied her mother and attended lectures at the Central University dressed as a man. It was still illegal for women to officially enroll. She wrote extensively on the state of prisons for women and on the role of women in society in works such as La Mujer del Porvenir, The Woman of the Future, and her other famous works are The Woman of the House, Letter to Offenders, and Prison Studies. Rosalia de Castro, another writer born in the capital city of Galicia, was one of the first female authors in Spain who published under her real name rather than a pseudonym. The lack of female independence, the working condition of harvest workers, emigration, and the prejudices of the emerging conservative bourgeoisie are among Castro's main concerns. Although Castro was keen to promote women's rights, her prime concern was to consolidate a separate Galician cultural identity in the face of central government hostility. Castro is considered the precursor of 20th century poetry in Spain and the founder of modern Galician literature. She is best known for her poetry contained in Galician songs and new medleys. Both are written in Galicia. Another writer that we will talk about who acquired eminence with her polemical essay The Critical Issue in 1883 was Emilia Pardo Bazán. It discussed Émile Zola and naturalism, and it made French and literary movements known in Spain. And it started an important literary controversy in which she championed a brand of naturalism that affirmed the free will of the individual. Her finest and most representative novels are The House of Ulloa and its sequel, Mother Nature, both of which are studies of the physical and moral ruin among the Galician squirearchy set against a beautiful natural background and a moral background of corrupting power. There were many women writers like Angela Grassi, editor of the women's journal El Correo de la Moda, The Fashion Mail, Concepción Jimeno de Flaquer, Faustina Sáenz de Melgar, and Pilar Sinuaez de Marco, who actually did not want to rock the boat and conformed to the prevailing ideology. Sinuaez de Marco, often using the pseudonym The Angel of the Home, was a prolific writer. She wrote over 100 works which focused mostly on women's themes. Jimeno de Flaquer published her study La Mujer Española, in which she called for reform and legal equality, but at the same time stressing the need for maternal qualities and femininity. This group of writers cultivated popular domestic fiction which merely strengthened traditional ideas about women, usually portrayed as passive, submissive creatures suffering misfortunes caused by uncaring husbands. Now we move to the women writers of the 20th century. The 20th century can be broadly divided in two parts. One is before the Civil War and the other is after the Civil War. Before the Civil War, we had writers like Carmen de Burgos, who is one of the most important and influential women in the third of the 20th century. She was an intellectual who held progressive views on old social norms of conduct, divorce, universal and women's suffrage, equal rights, and women's legal abilities. In addition to 1,000 of articles published in 15 newspapers in which she collaborated, De Burgos published almost 100 books between 1900 and 1932, the majority of which were short novels or collections of short stories. Carmen de Burgos' most renowned stories, often based on real events, focus on the dreadful experience of individual women within the broader framework of the demand for legal reforms and women's rights. Article 438, which refers to and even cites part of Article 438 of the infamous Penal Code, shows the shocking double moral standards applied to adulterous women and men at the same time. Some of her other known works include The Unhappy Wife, I Want to Live My Life, The Sun's Silence. Another writer whom we will talk about is Rosa Chasel. She was a major essayist, poet and novelist. Chasel's writings constantly draw attention to the elusiveness of language, to the ways in which meaning is always deferred, and to the slipperiness of signification. Chasel's primary interest was not feminist or revolutionary politics, and she did not aim to reach a mass readership. She was writing for an intellectual elite. Her important poetry collections are At the Edge of a Well, Prohibited Verse, which is a mixture of unrhymed pieces. Frequent themes are philosophical inspiration, faith, separation, religiosity, friendship, and her wanderings. During the dictatorship and in the post-war period, we have writers like Mercè Rodoreda, who wrote in Catalan. She is considered the most influential contemporary Catalan language writer with translations into more than 30 languages. Her well-known novels are The Diamond Square, also translated as The Time of the Doves. It is considered a modern classic. She spent a large part of her life in voluntary exile in France and Switzerland and only returned to Spain in 1972. And she settled down in Barcelona and she completed her most ambitious novel, which is Miral Trencat, A Broken Mirror, which draws an excellent portrait of Catalan society at the turn of the 20th century. It has also been translated into Hindi. In April 1939, General Franco came to power after the fall of the Republican forces. The militaristic National Catholic regime did away with democratic liberalism. The feminine section, an arm of the Falange, was created and membership was compulsory for most women. Carmen Laforet, who lived between 1921 and 2004, had an enormous impact on the post-war cultural scene. It undermined her novel Nada, undermined the triumphalist rhetoric of the victorious right and the boastful claims of a return to order and contentment. Carmen Martin Gaite, who was born in Salamanca in 1925, produced a large body of works in various genres over the course of a 5-decade career. Although she is primarily known as a novelist, short story writer and social commentator. Her novel El Cuarto de Atrás, The Back Room, is invaluable for the reconstruction of everyday life as experienced by young Spanish women in the 1940s and 50s. The next writer we will talk about is Ana Maria Matute, who was only 10 years old when the war began in 1936. And this inspired her literary works to focus on children caught in the conflict. Although Matute matured as a writer in the post-guerrilla period of the dictatorship, some of the most recurrent themes are violence, alienation, misery, and the loss of innocence. Her work was heavily censored under Franco and she was blacklisted from working as a journalist. Josefina Aldecoa, in her treatment of themes such as a woman's place in society under and after dictatorship, mother-daughter relationships, war and memory, confirms her unique role as a contemporary novelist concerned with women's identity in Spain and as a writer of the mid-generation, also called the Los Niños de la Guerra, the children of the war. Aldecoa experienced the trauma of the Spanish Civil War and Franco's dictatorship at first hand. Her literary apprenticeship began with a student publication in 1950 but it was only 30 years later that Aldecoa embarked on a publishing career. Her most outstanding book is his Historia de una Maestra, or Story of a School Teacher, based upon her mother's teaching experiences during the Second Republic. Now we come to Esther Tusquets, who was a Spanish publisher, novelist and essayist. She was the director of the publishing house Lumen in Barcelona, and her first novel, El mismo mar de todos los veranos, was published in 1978. Her focus was language and the lesbian body as battlefields. Now we come to the end of the dictatorship and the period of democracy and after. When Franco's dictatorship ended in 1975, women's literature in Spain found itself revitalized. Spain's transition to democracy led to a so-called boom in women's narrative, with the emergence of a new group of writers who began to publish at that time. Among them are Rosa Montero, Lourdes Ortiz, Soledad Puertolas, Marina Mayoral, Cristina Fernandez Cuba, Carmen Riera, and Esther Tusquets. Still others such as Carmen Martin Gaite, Ana Maria Foix, and Montserrat Roig, who had already published during Francoism, started to write more self-conscious and experimental works in the late 1970s. Rosa Montero, 1951, is a Spanish journalist and contemporary fiction author. Rosa Montero, born in 1951, she graduated from Madrid School of Philosophy and Arts and began working as a journalist in one of the most important national newspapers, El País, where she has been working for the last 4 decades. She published her first novel called Chronicle of Enmity in 1979. She is a benchmark in the world of Hispanic literature and journalism today. Her works focus on criticizing the injustices in Spanish society, and she has been defending the rights of women, animals, and democracy. And another fundamental characteristic of her work is that she continuously blurs the border between journalism and literature. Almudena Grandes, another very important voice in Spanish letters, was born in Madrid in 1960, and her first novel, Las Edades de Lulu, was an erotic novel and inspired a film of the same name. She wrote more than a dozen novels whose protagonists mostly live on the edges of traditional Spanish society, either struggling against sexual restrictions or marginalized by poverty. She is recognized for her historically themed novels revisiting the years of the Second Republic, the Civil War, and the Franco dictatorship, with a focus on ordinary people who were involved in very difficult political struggles. The first of these works, The Frozen Heart, was published in 2007. Grandes was also a prominent voice in Spain's public sphere, a regular columnist in El País, and frequent radio and television commentator. She was a strong voice calling for what has become known as the recovery of historical memory. She died recently in 2021 after a year of fighting cancer. The next writer we will talk about is Cristina Fernandez Cubas, who is also a writer and a journalist. Most of the women writers that we see today are also writers as well as journalists. And she has been described as one of the most important writers who began to publish after the end of the Franco dictatorship. And she has also been credited with inaugurating what is known as a renaissance in the short story genre. In 2009, her anthology Todos los Cuentos was awarded several prizes, including the Premio Ciudad de Barcelona, the Premio Salambó, and the Premio Tormenta. Mercedes Abad, another voice, she won the Premio La Sonrisa Vertical, a prize for erotic narrative, in 1986, and she is also a journalist and short story writer. Lucia Echevarria de Astenza, who is also known as part of the generation Cronin. The Cronin generation is a generation of Spanish writers who were 20-somethings in the 90s, the Spanish generation X. It took its name from José Ángel Maña's Historias del Cronin, a story of a group of nihilistic 20-somethings who drink, do drugs, indulge in casual sex, and are generally immoral and antisocial. She won the Premio Nadal in 1998 for her novel Beatriz y los Cuerpos Celestes, and won the Primavera Prize in 2001 and the Nadal once again in 2004, confirming her presence in Spanish literature. Belén Ruiz de Gopegui, another young writer, well, not so young anymore, Spanish novelist and essayist, is known for her novel L'Oreal, which won 3 prizes, Premio de la Crítica, Premio Fundación José, Manuel Lara de Novela, etc. From 2011 to 2017, she published 3 novels that explore the relationship between the internet and individuals' capacity for action through the systems of interconnectedness. These are Acceso No Autorizado, El Comité de la Noche, and Quédate este día y esta noche conmigo. Najat El Hashmi, born in 1979, is a Moroccan Spanish writer, and she writes in Catalan. She is the author of a personal essay on her bicultural identity and 3 previous novels, the first of which earned her the 2008 Ramon Llull Prize, the 2009 Prix Ulysse, and was a finalist for the 2009 Prix Méditerranée Étrangère. So, we come to the end of this video and we see that you have learnt about Santa Teresa de Jesus and Maria de Sayas, both important voices of the 16th and 17th century, and we've also seen the important aspects of the lives and works of women writers of the 19th and 20th century Spain. We've also learnt about some young voices from the 21st century. I would urge you to read some of the writings by these women, and I would like to mention my personal favorites, which is Sor Juana's poetry and her response to Sor Filotea, which is a text which is beautifully written and talks about the rights of women. We have get through this Gómez de Avellaneda and her novel Sab, which talks about slavery and the injustice of slavery. And then I come to the 20th century, where we have Carmen Martín Gaites, and I would urge you to read The Back Room, which is one of her best novels. And we have Almudena Grandes, The Frozen Heart, which is also known as the memory novel, where she talks about the lives of ordinary people during the Spanish Civil War. And lastly, I would like to mention Rosa Montero, who is a very well-known journalist, as we've already seen, and her Chronicles of Enmity, which are short chronicles about the relationship between men and women in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
A mí no me gusta decir que soy feminista, porque prefiero decir que soy posfeminista, que es un concepto que no tiene lugar ahora mismo en el mundo, pero creo que tiene mucho sentido, porque el feminismo, que fue la única revolución social que triunfó en el siglo XX, la única, que se dice pronto, la única revolución social que triunfó en el siglo XX fue el feminismo. Pero resulta que ¿cuál era el objetivo del feminismo? Sentar las bases teóricas de la igualdad y las bases jurídicas de la igualdad. ¿Y qué pasa? Que ahora están sentadas. Pero no hay igualdad, o sea, hay que cambiar de estrategia. La estrategia feminista que iba a consagrar la igualdad jurídica cumplió su objetivo y no fue capaz de lograr la igualdad real. Ahora hay que cambiar de discurso, ahora el objetivo que tiene que ser: logremos la igualdad real. Y para lograr la igualdad real es fundamental que la sociedad comprenda que los problemas de las mujeres son problemas de la sociedad, no de las mujeres. Si nosotros somos el 52% de la población mundial, los problemas de las mujeres son los problemas mayoritarios de la población mundial. Entonces hay que acabar con el Día de la Mujer, con el Instituto de la Mujer, con los sindicatos de la mujer, que son muy bien intencionados, pero ya dice el refrán que el infierno está, ¿cómo es? Está amueblado, no. Está embaldosado con buenas intenciones, y lo que hay que intentar es eso, decir, bueno, pues es que los problemas de las trabajadoras no son problemas de las mujeres, son problemas de los trabajadores. Los problemas de la conciliación personal, laboral y familiar no son un problema de las mujeres, son un problema de toda la gente que vive en pareja en este mundo. Hay que cambiar la óptica. Y a mí, por lo menos, me parece que mientras en España no se cumpla el axioma igual trabajo, igual salario, no hay que celebrar el Día de la Mujer Trabajadora. Me parece que es más combativo y más sensato negarse a celebrar eso que celebrarlo.